Good morning, it's 8 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophie Sorry, Sophie and Wilf, it's been a long week. Good morning from me as well, let's get to it.
The looming spectre of food shortages in the summer if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, planning for worst-case scenarios.
Prime Minister hauls social media bosses into Downing Street, tells them to step up and take responsibility to make things safer for kids online.
An urgent review is launched into the deaths of care leavers after a Sky News investigation exposes a broken system.
We're also going to be talking to the classicist and broadcaster Mary Beard about how ancient history can make sense of events today.
And we look at the threat posed by deepfake videos to British politics and elections.
Hello, thanks for being with us this morning. The government's confirmed in the last hour that officials have been quietly drawing up reasonable worst-case scenario contingency plans in case the conflict in the Middle East leads to food shortages here in the UK.
We've been reporting, of course, on the prospect of fuel shortages in recent weeks, but the blockade of shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz could also impact supply of carbon dioxide, which is critical to the food industry.
The Business Secretary told us the public should be reassured, though, by the behind-the-scenes planning that's going on. On carbon dioxide specifically, because we've talked about farming, we've talked breweries as well, and I'm right in saying, I think as well, because they kind of add the fizz to drinks, beer, maybe for the World Cup, perhaps a concern for people. Like, how long kind of stockpiles do we have of this stuff?
At this moment, this is not a concern for our economy.
OK.
I can reassure people of that.
You'll be able to get a beer for the World Cup.
If that changes, we will be... I will speak about it and I will make an announcement about it. But for this moment in time, there is not the concern because I have taken the action.
OK, thank you. And look, it is, like you say, you never want to be alarmist with the stuff, but it's also important to kind of get the information out to people as well.
If any of these things change, I will be upfront with the public about it in advance so that we can prepare. But right now, people should go on as they are, enjoying beer, enjoying their meats, enjoying all the salads. But also, there are critical uses for CO2. MRI scanning, for example, water purification. It's involved in our nuclear industry, our civil nuclear power industry. So some defensive uses for it as well. There's lots of needs for CO2, so these are the reasons why I took it so seriously way back just 6 months ago, not just in the last few weeks.
Well, joining us to discuss a bit more details, our carbon dioxide expert and political
Now I am after an hour of Googling.
Lucy. No, but this is calming people by saying, look, we are doing all the planning for worst-case scenarios. A bit of credit to him as well in terms of thinking ahead on this specific plant that he was referencing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I'm sure there would be criticism of the government if it turned out in a few months down the line that they hadn't been planning for a scenario like this. And one thing I feel like needs to be said as well, how many times do you question government ministers about a leak? And, you know, there's a refusal to comment, there's a back and forth about whether or not it's true. And he said, yeah, you know what, now it's out there, we have been doing this work. Making the point to really reassure people and say, actually, this is why this is something you don't need to worry about because we are working behind the scenes. I mean, what it does do, I suppose, is it does show that the government is concerned about the impact this conflict is having, whether it's on fuel, fuel supplies, fuel prices, energy bills, and now potentially on food supplies as well. Speaking to officials behind the scenes as well, you know, they don't seem overly worried about this. At the moment, they feel that it's stable, and the critical thing here is that they're pointing more towards the possibility of food, of a lack of supply as opposed to food shortages. So there is a nuance there. But some honesty, and the government is working on this, trying to mitigate any possible effect on all of us.
Yeah, on that, genuinely, I thought when Peter Carr came in this morning that he would just refuse to comment on it all. I thought that's what he would do, and he didn't. And I have to say, you know, like, credit, actually, for being open and honest about it. And I think that it is reassuring to people to know that they are looking into these things, as you say. But, yeah, look, it does just show the impact of the closure of this strait on all kinds of things.
Yeah,
I mean, carbon dioxide, not something I would have thought of before this morning.
No. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? But, you know, in your food, extending the shelf life, packed salads, ready-made meals, but also the drinks. You know, there were concerns about...
Will this impact
you going to the pub for the World Cup with, you know, will there be a shortage of beer? Peter Kyle is saying absolutely not. That's exactly
That's a vote winner,
that's
right
a vote.
there.
Yeah,
exactly.
He's opened the plant. We love it.
Pubs will be open late and there will be plentiful supplies, no matter what.
No, what he did say, and I think we should hold him to account on this, is that if anything does change, he will be upfront with the public. So
yeah.
I'm sure we should remember that. And
yeah, bookmark that one.
Bookmark that one, yeah.
Lucy, thank you very much indeed.
Meanwhile, electricity bills will be cut by a quarter for thousands of businesses to help cope with the price of shocks from the Iran war. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, made the announcement during IMF meetings in Washington and promised there would be no rise in household bills as a result.
There's a bit of a catch, though, because the relief isn't going to come in for another year, and some businesses are worried that in the meantime, the conflict could send them to the wall. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who sat down with the IMF's chief economist. He warned we could face a recession if the war drags on.
Since the outbreak of war, there's been one of these big overarching questions which has been kind of haunting people, both here at the International Monetary Fund and elsewhere around the world, which is the question of just how bad is this likely to get for the global economy? How would this stack up versus other crises that we've had in the past? And now we're getting closer to an answer to that. We've spoken to the chief economist here at the IMF, who's given us a somewhat depressing but perhaps realistic impression of what this actually means for the global economy, and in short, it's not pretty. And it would constitute what the IMF would normally categorise as a global recession. This is the chief economist of the IMF talking through some of those scenarios.
We decided to release 3 scenarios. We have what we call our reference forecast, which is assuming a relatively benign, short-lived conflict that would end about now, and from which they will start to rebuild and reopen the straits, and oil and energy would start flowing. And under that relatively modest scenario, we're still seeing a significant impact on global growth. And the severe scenario, where energy prices in that scenario remain elevated, not just this year, but going even higher into next year, so pretty serious disruption there, $125 a barrel average price for 2027, then in that scenario, growth would fall to 2% in 26 and 27, and inflation will reach about 6%.
And that's kind of, 2% is kind of, that's global recession territory.
Well, it's sometimes referred to as that way. It would certainly feel like a recession for a lot of people around the world. 2% is a growth number we've only had 4 times since 1980. And 2 of those times were times of global crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and the COVID-19 pandemic. It could get really bad, but we're not there yet. We're all hopeful that there will be a swift resolution, that the ceasefire will take hold and continue, that there will be a reopening of the strait in the near future. And of course, every day that this situation continues, we don't have the shipments of oil and gas and other products coming out of the Gulf, then we're drifting towards the adverse scenario, and maybe even worse.
So that's the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund. Worth saying, the UK got downgraded more than any other G7 nation in terms of its economic growth forecast. Part of that is the fact that Britain is more sensitive to imported energy costs than many other countries around the world. That's something that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says that she's very aware of and is trying to do something about. She has a new programme which is designed to try to reduce costs, particularly for high energy-intensive businesses. The only problem with this new programme that she says will extend to 10,000 companies is that it's going to take some time before it kicks in. And so it's not going to be an immediate solution to people facing higher energy costs at the moment. So those in industry groups have been quite sceptical about how much that's actually going to make a difference for their members.
Ed Conway there from the IMF. More meetings, of course, today for the Chancellor, and no doubt. By the way, a bit of pick up yesterday about how critical she was as well of suggesting that this has really pressured us, the decisions the US has made. Here, by the way, GDP growth coming in for the month of February, as you can see, 0.5%. It's a really big jump. And it was forecast to be 0.1. January, by the way, had been 0. They revised that back up to 0.1 as well. So a slight improvement in January's numbers. But yeah, February, nice print. If you've got 0.5 consistently, it'd be an improvement, but...
I mean, February just cuts off just before, obviously, the start of the war. Yeah, it's almost like a tease of what we could have had.
Yeah. But decent numbers there this morning for the economy.
All eyes, of course, on how long the conflict is going to go on for. We've been discussing the impact on the economy, and there are some positive signs that a ceasefire could be reached in southern Lebanon, where Israel has continued to carry out strikes despite the ceasefire between the US and Iran.
Well, in the last few hours, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social trying to get a little breathing room between Israel and Lebanon. It's been a long time since the two leaders have spoken, like 34 years. It will happen tomorrow. Nice. Sally's able to join us now to talk about all of this. Sally, what is the latest of when the next round of talks happen, both between Israel and Lebanon, but also the US and Iran?
Yeah, let's just start with the Lebanon question first, Wilf, because we have had another development since I last spoke to you. An Israeli politician has done an interview on Army radio in Israel and said that Benjamin Netanyahu will be speaking today with the Lebanese president. So that, reiterates what Donald Trump announced in that Truth Social post, that there would be these talks between the Israeli and Lebanese leaders today, something that is historic and a significant diplomatic move. And it does sound like it might take place, and that probably this is happening due to a lot of pressure coming from the American side. Now, while this is, very hopeful when it comes to the diplomatic efforts, I think any sort of a ceasefire will be far more complicated to broker between Israel and Lebanon, not least because Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly announced to his security cabinet last night that they are going to continue bombarding and intensifying their attacks on a certain area of southern Lebanon. And of course, because Hezbollah has said, we do not support these talks with the Israelis, and if there is any sort of deal, it will not be recognized by us. Nevertheless, certainly something extremely significant and historic to watch very closely today, potential talks between the Lebanese and Israeli leaders. And then, of course, when it comes to the situation between the US and Iran, it does sound like they are working towards further talks in Islamabad next week. The army chief for Pakistan has been in Tehran delivering Washington's latest message to the Iranian regime. It sounds like they will potentially meet in Islamabad for a second round of talks. It may not be the same seniority that we saw before with the American delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance. It could be more technical this time. We don't know yet. But certainly the White House press secretary echoed Donald Trump's remarks when she said, they feel good about a potential deal. She wouldn't confirm yet whether they're going to extend this current ceasefire, which is due to end in less than a week now. But certainly something significant that's happened here in the last 24 hours in the UAE, which is a potential real show of confidence in this ceasefire, is that in-person learning is going to resume in schools on Monday, much to the relief of parents here who've been homeschooling their kids for weeks. And certainly the UAE government would not be reopening schools if they felt there was an imminent risk of escalation in this war. And then, of course, the big headache in all of this, the Strait of Hormuz, very little traffic flowing through there. That's still a major issue when it comes to the impact on the global economy. US Central Command has said that their blockade is now successful, stopping traffic in and out of Iranian ports. They've turned around 10 vessels, as I understand it, in the last 24 hours. But an interesting development, Donald Trump has also announced on his Truth Social that Chinese vessels will be allowed through. Now, that's an interesting development because China is so reliant on the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly half of their oil comes via that choke point. And Donald Trump, seems to really want to keep President Xi on side, not least because they're meeting in a few weeks' time, but also because he said in the same Truth Social post, we don't want them supplying weapons to Iran. And they've said that they won't. So I'm going to give President Xi a big fat hug in a few weeks' time when they meet at their summit. I mean, it's extraordinary stuff. But he also said in the same post, don't forget we're really good at fighting and we can return to that if we need to. And I think that's something certainly to bear in mind because we've been here before. It's very reminiscent of February when negotiations were taking place between both sides in Geneva and there was this enormous military buildup of US hardware and troops in the Middle East, and that is happening again. A third aircraft carrier is currently on the way to the region, and more Marines are expected to arrive from California towards the end of this month. A reminder that while talks are still happening when it comes to Lebanon and when it comes to Iran, still anything is possible when it comes to this war.
Sally, thank you very much indeed.
Let's go to Australia now, where the government is trying to shore up petrol imports as pumps have, in some places, run dry.
And to make matters worse, one of the country's 2 oil refineries actually went up in flames overnight. We can bring in our correspondent Nicole, who's in Sydney for us. And Nicole, what is the situation?
Well, as you said, this major refinery that's in the state of Victoria, it caught fire overnight. So we've had these pictures come through, black smoke pouring off it. Now, the fire is now out, but it's definitely going to affect the state's supply of petrol. And the country's government is saying that Victorians will need to brace themselves for an increase in prices. This is on top of the prices here, like the rest of the world, that are already through the roof. Now, when you talk about the issue of petrol stations running dry in Australia, they're not running dry because we don't have petrol. We've got petrol, we've got diesel, we've got jet fuel, but people have been worried, especially out in regional, remote areas of Australia. They've been going in, filling up jerry cans, filling up all of their vehicles. So there has been a huge amount of concern here. The government has been trying to tell people to back off, not to worry. They've also been on a tour of Asia, speaking to the governments of Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, all of those Asian countries, which in fact supply Australia with almost 80–90% of this country's refined petrol. So Australia is incredibly dependent on Asia. And Asia, as we know, is now starting to have trouble getting through the supplies of oil that it needs, of course, from the Strait of Hormuz. And this is the impact that we're seeing here in Australia, as we are across the rest of the world. But there is one very interesting point, and that is there is a big winner here in Australia, and that is the liquefied natural gas, the LNG industry. Because while we hear so much about LNG from Qatar and the strike on the Ras Laffan plant there, Australia is a major LNG producer, and right now, if you're a gas producer, you are getting windfall prices. So Australia is able to sort of step in to those short-term contracts that the Gulf Middle Eastern countries haven't been able to supply. So Australia losing on one hand, but if you're in the gas business, well, you're doing pretty well.
Really interesting, Nicole. Great to have that perspective from on the ground in Australia. Now, one other area that we've been talking a lot about over the last couple of weeks is aviation fuel here. And the body that represents airports across Europe warns the airline industry is at risk of a systemic shortage in jet fuel in the coming weeks if the Strait of Hormuz continues to be blockaded.
And look, understandably, that's led to a lot of worry about summer flights. Could they be grounded? Could airlines start trimming their schedules even further? And one man who knows an awful lot about this, all of the stuff, is a travel correspondent at The Independent, Simon Calder. Great to have you here. So how worried should we be about jet fuel then?
Well, I'm just looking at the EasyJet financial trading update, which has just come out in the past hour. They are saying we spent an extra £25 million that we weren't expecting in March on higher fuel costs. And this is coming from an airline which is extremely well hedged. In other words, Britain's biggest budget airline has locked into low fuel prices for most of its needs. But that small proportion that was unhedged, yep, it's paying £560 per minute more than it thought it would be doing. EasyJet, by the way, says it's in good shape. It can weather whatever is coming. But yes, to your point, they are clearly feeling the pain.
But that is from March anyway. How much does it get harder going forward?
Right. Well, let's talk about the price, if we may. So there was a sudden surge in jet fuel prices after the start of the US-Israeli attack on Iran, and it's basically doubled from around $100 per barrel of jet fuel to around about 200, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. And it's actually gone up much more than the price of crude oil because it is in such short supply. Now, I need to say that Airlines UK, the body representing EasyJet, British Airways, Jet2, Virgin Atlantic and so on, say, look, we've got plenty of fuel. We've got multiple sources, but clearly we are already seeing some places, there's a few airports in Italy where they're running out, across Asia where they are much more dependent on jet fuel from the Gulf. We've seen a lot of flight cuts. But it's a really interesting blend of, are we going to be running out of fuel? Should we be cutting back on that? And we're going to cut these flights because they're unprofitable. And I'm flying out tomorrow to the Channel Islands. My flight was cancelled because of soft demand, and they moved me to a different flight.
Well, so to you, that happened to us?
Yes.
They should be aware of who they're cancelling.
Yeah, don't cancel Simon Polder's flight. Everyone.
In terms, so we had Michael O'Leary on probably 2 weeks ago now, and in that interview he said if things persist as they are in the Gulf, the phrasing he said then was mid to late April.
Yes.
Then that will lead to shortages over May and June.
Yeah, very much. That is, I'm looking at sort of the second week in May. Now, the crucial thing is, please do not panic. If you have a scenario, which we've never seen before, of airlines being told you have to reduce the amount of fuel you are using by 1/5, whether they do that because they're told to or because they think, yeah, we're going to do that, then actually they can, most of them, manage it pretty easily. If you take British Airways, for instance, they've got many flights between London and New York. You could take 1 or 2 of those out of the schedule without too much of an adverse effect. You know, you might find your flight is leaving an hour earlier than it was going to be. It would be really tough on the airlines. They don't want to do it, but it would be manageable. Similarly, EasyJet, 6 flights a day, Gatwick to Nice, you can kind of get rid of one of those. So it would be relatively straightforward. However, some people in the travel industry are saying that you could actually see entire routes cut. I think that's unlikely, and you are always protected by air passenger rights rules. For instance, I've got a lovely £40 flight out to Cyprus booked next month. If for some reason that is cancelled, the airline still has to find a way of getting me to my destination.
This is really, really useful advice for people. It's great advice for people. Is it going to be a case of it's just going to get more expensive? Is that what it's going to be?
Undoubtedly, that will feed through. So, for instance, EasyJet, for its summer programme, is 70% hedged, locked in at a really good price for jet fuel, and that will be a kind of benefit, but that's going to gradually unwind. And so by the winter, we will be looking at certainly higher prices, quite possibly quite a fewer flights. And that's simply because you might have a route which is kind of marginally profitable at $70 a barrel. Once you're over 200, forget it.
Not to try and sensationalise this, but just to give me the supply picture more clearly. Obviously, we use that time frame Michael O'Leary gave. Yeah. What if things are still happening in May?
Well, it gets very, very tight. Now, the UK...
But then are we talking about more than just one flight to Nice getting cancelled? Or is that what causes one flight to Nice getting cancelled?
That would, yes, if we got to that stage, I mean, we've got multiple sources of fuel, and there's various things you can do in order to, you know, for instance, if you're going to one of the Italian airports where they're saying, we're running out of fuel, that's fine, you just fly in with enough for the homeward journey. So, yes, you could see shortages feeding through. We're not there yet, but certainly, it's 4 weeks today. I talked to all the bosses of all the airlines and said, all the big airlines, and just said, so what's it looking like? And they were kind of saying, well, we're hoping it's all going to be over in a couple of weeks and then we'll be fine. If it feeds through to kind of later in April, then by May, you might be seeing some impacts. But at the moment, if you've got a flight booked, you're fine. Air passenger right rules are going to look after you. The people who might be missing out are those who haven't yet committed. They might be feeling uncertain. That's a reasonable thing. But they might find that if we do see flight cancellations, then suddenly there aren't seats available or they cost an absolute fortune.
So this is interesting. So what's the advice then if you haven't booked your summer holiday yet, right? And there's lots of people out there who aren't the organised brigade, right? Should you book it now or should you wait and see? What would you do?
Well, if you're avoiding the school summer holidays, there's some fantastic bargains out there. That's how I could get a flight to Cyprus for 40 quid.
Quite fancy that, 40 quid to Cyprus.
So, yeah, there's some deals around. And bear in mind that you will be looked after. If you book a proper package holiday, you've got even more protection because that will... The company has to make sure that goes ahead. If for some reason, if it can't, then you get a full refund.
Simon, great stuff. Thanks so much. If you go off to Cyprus, you can do some reporting. Tell us if HMS Dragon has gotten there yet.
You know what? I'm going to pitch it as
work trip to
work trip.
Yeah, but actually, it's not much point expensing 40 quid. Do it with a trip to New York.
Yeah.
Work. Taking the World Cup final whilst you're there.
I think we need to cut the broadcast feeder at this point. Anyway, the Prime Minister is summoning bosses from some of the world's biggest social media companies into Downing Street this morning. Leaders from Meta, say Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., Google, TikTok and X are going to meet the Prime Minister and also the Technology Secretary in number 10. Keir Starmer's calling on big tech to step up and take responsibility to protect young people and keep them safe
online. This is, of course, as MPs continue to consult on whether to ban social media for under 16s. Molly's here with more on what we can expect from this meeting and who's going to be there.
Yeah, well, it's getting underway in the next 20 minutes or so. They're calling all these leaders. I say leaders, I don't think we're expecting Elon Musk to sort of rock up, but I think it's senior leaders at all these big companies, some serious names, because we know there are countless horror stories, aren't there, about the types of harms that children are being exposed to online at the moment. And actually, I'm quite struck by some of the language that the Prime Minister's used in his statement this morning. It gives you a sense of the immediacy and kind of urgency at which they see the issue, because they are under a huge amount of pressure from politicians as normal, but parents who are really, really worried about their kids. I'm going to read you a little bit of it. He said, "Parents rightly expect action and fast. That's why we've already taken the powers needed to move quickly once our consultation ends. I will take whatever steps necessary to keep children safe. Today is about making sure social media companies step up and take responsibility. The consequences of failing to act are stark. We owe it to parents and to the next generation to put children's safety first, because they won't forgive us if we don't." That consultation refers to the fact that they've got this kind of consultation going on, asking think tanks, charities as usual, but also parents and young people to consult essentially on what they think of a potential social media ban. We saw Australia brought it in December. But interestingly, actually, Peter Carl, who in his former role as tech secretary, now business secretary, but actually said, you know, a ban should be seen as a last resort, which I thought was quite interesting, actually. In their view, the government's official position really is that a ban at the moment is actually premature, which is why they've got this consultation going on, because they say they want to look at various aspects rather than just an outright ban.
You're getting a real different feeling, I think, depending on who you talk to in the Cabinet. Like, Peter Kyle, I would say, is way over here and been quite reluctant to go for the ban. And then you've got other people, I think, who are, like, in Keir Starmer's ear much more. It's
not. It doesn't feel like it's a clear kind of party line thing, does it? It's like they're quite split on it. But this consultation, they're looking at a couple of different things, and they say that's because we don't think necessarily a ban solves it all. Because we've seen in Australia, for example, you know, it was December that they brought it in, and I think it was a couple of days ago they had the first sort of bit of data showing that despite a ban 4 months ago, they've still got 60% of kids with access to social media. So they're looking at things like VPNs and how kids might circumnavigate a ban if it were to be brought in, but also restricting really addictive features and potentially bringing in overnight curfews. So there are all sorts of things that they're going to have to put to these social media companies.
I'm sceptical, by the way, because they haven't told us who these guys are from the social media companies.
Might head down there.
Who is it going to be? Like you say,
we recognise them.
You know, it could be
that matters,
random,
though, doesn't it? Yeah.
You know, like it shows how serious it is, the cast list, doesn't it? But they won't release it.
I'll try and get down there and let you know.
Destroying the career prospects of whoever's going to be there. Some random junior people. They're like, well,
maybe they won't be. Maybe they won't be. Molly's going to go and find out.
I bet it's the head of UK.
Do you think? Well, why won't they say that then?
I mean, if it's less than that, it's pretty weak. But no, I'm doing the same.
You agree?
But no, I mean, but I'm saying is I wouldn't be. I'm not surprised. It's not going to be Zuck and Musk.
No. But I just think it's weird that they won't tell us who they are.
Yeah. But then have a look.
Yeah, let's find out. You're going to be like, oh, I recognise. That would be really
no one.
Yeah, exactly. Right, Molly, great stuff. Thank you very much. We take a break from social media to gaming. We're going to be talking about the impact that is having on young people's lives, but also the opportunity in what is a booming industry.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armour on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
Well, let's kick off.
And make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs?
He's coming out! What more do you need?
Welcome back. More than 2 care leavers aged between 18 to 24 die every single week in England. That's according to new data obtained by Sky News, which revealed 106 deaths in the year to March, up from 91 the year before.
It's something that we focused on in this programme because if you look at all the data, it shows that there is a serious issue when it comes to people in care, and the government is now launching a review into this, prompted in part by Sky News' reporting of the story of Nanita, a young person raised in care who died just after her 18th birthday.
Well, here's our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin. Just a warning, Nick's report does contain references to suicide.
Oh, my days.
Yeah, this is it.
That's the window of my flat. That window right there.
Right. Is it odd being back here, or...?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's surreal.
I bet.
Journalist Ashley John Baptiste grew up in care, and he's taken me back to the moment he left the system, and the system left him.
I remember just laying out a mattress in the living room. Foster mum left me, and I was completely alone.
Children's social care isn't just in crisis, it is, by the government's own admission, broken.
I spent months investigating the death of a care leaver called Nanita Grabovskite. She was just 18 years old when she sadly took her own life. She was a child of the state. But Nanita is not alone. 2 care leavers each week, aged between 16 and 24, die in England. And that's prompted the government to launch a review into why so many care leavers are dying young.
Now Ashley John Baptiste will lead this review.
Nanita's story is tragic. It staggers me. It staggers me that we're in a position where so many people like me are dying. And, you know, you've done incredible work in telling Nanita's story, but society's not aware.
Josh McAllister is the minister in charge of the care system.
There should be widespread public moral outrage at what's happening for a lot of our care leavers. They've grown up in the care of the state. Very often they leave the care system isolated, alone, living in flats by themselves. And Nanita's story, really tragic story, it tells a lot of people about stuff that's happening in the care system, and we need more of those stories to be told.
In England, children in care leave the system at 18. Campaigners say they need proper legal protections.
What is required beyond this review is a real openness by ministers to the possibility that much more is needed than a 2-month piece of research. Preventing the early premature deaths of care leavers requires really comprehensive reform.
The government say it will be spending £100 million to help prevent care leaver deaths. It is a hidden death toll in the shadows of a failing system.
We're joined again by our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, and also the care campaigner, Terry Galloway, as well, who Nick's just been describing as the man who is like the campaigner keeping the government on its toes on these issues.
Yeah, and Terry can speak for his own experiences in a moment. I think this review that's being launched by the government, you can't knock it. It's certainly a positive thing, and I think it has been borne out of not just our reporting, but the figures themselves. You know, we've obtained new figures that show that care leaver deaths are going in the wrong direction. You know, now more than 2 a week are dying as care leavers. That just cannot be acceptable, and the system needs root and branch overhaul. I think part of the problem is that sense of abandonment that care leavers feel at 18 when the system kicks them out. All the support is lost. We've got to try and get away from that and feel like care leavers have some kind of life after care where they can feel nurtured and supported, just as our children, that my children would feel post-18. I just don't push them out into the world and leave them. So I think that we'll see what happens with this review, but I think the government know that this is a problem that they cannot ignore anymore.
Terry, what do you think of this review?
I do welcome it, but it's not needed. The government know exactly what's going on, in particular Josh McAllister. He did the independent review, children's social care. He knows exactly what's going on. If it can do anything, if it can put into the public consciousness exactly what's happening, then that's a great thing. But the actual tangible things that the government needs to do, they know exactly what they need to do. My family, my sister, she was in the care system, I was in the care system, my brother was in the care system. Both of them had children that have gone into the care system, and both of them are dead right now. You know, care experienced people are 70% more likely to die prematurely than any other group in society. We live 20 years less, and it has to stop. These numbers, whatever the government are saying, 105 numbers, they are vastly, grossly underestimated. You know, care leavers are dying absolutely every day, and we're not basically sitting up and taking notice, and that's what we need to do.
I honestly, all of these figures just astonish me. I feel like if it was any other group of people in our society who had the life expectancy difference that you're talking about there, we'd be out on the streets marching about it every day. And it's everything, isn't it? You know, we've spoken about it, you know, prisons, homelessness.
Yeah, we are talking about children. Yeah. We are talking about the most vulnerable people in society that we seem to think is acceptable to let go on their own at 18, live in somewhere on their own, give them £50 a week for groceries and expect that life to continue normally. It just doesn't stack up.
And also look at the background that they've had as well. It's not like they've just been, you know, a stable home, the same family, mum and dad there, and then at 18 you go your own way. They've been moving around, they've had all kinds of...
What's happening is we're leaving the care system and we're just getting re-traumatised and re-traumatised because of the barriers. Now, care experienced people feel isolated, and that's one of the reasons for deaths. They're committing suicide. Now, the national average, the general population, 7% of the UK population feel isolated. Now, if the government asked care leavers that very same question, they would probably find that it's 60 or 70%, you know, and because they're not asking that question, that's why it's not in the public domain. So what I've just done recently is I've been working with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and for the first time we're asking in a survey that they're doing of 208,000 people in England, are you care experienced? Now, I shouldn't, as a campaigner, have to be knocking on every single government department and asking them to just sit up and take notice and listen and hear the voice of care experienced people. They should be doing that systematically.
When you said at the start that it's obvious what the government should be doing, we don't need this review as much as you welcome the review, what are the obvious steps?
We need to make care experience a protected characteristic, because if we make it a protected characteristic, then that will be added into equality impact assessments. So whenever a system, a service, any public money is spent or any decision is made right across Whitehall, right across local government, they will have to think about the impact that decision or service has on care experienced people. And until they do that, we're not going to get a change.
So in the same way that gender or ethnicity would be factored into any plan that the government or local government has, Terry's argument is that the very fact that you are care experienced should also be built into how we employ people, where we build sports centres, how we give children access to colleges. Care experience should be at the heart of all the decisions that we make, just like race or ethnicity or gender is at the moment. And I have to say, though, Terry, you are getting quite a bit of pushback from the government about this. It's not something that they're saying, yeah, it's a great idea, we're going to do it.
Well, it's ironic because Josh, you know, I worked with Josh before he was a politician, and he made it a recommendation. But now he's in government. The government are still saying exactly the same thing as what the last government has said, and they're not looking to do it because they think it's going to be unmanageable, and they're rolling through with corporate parenting. But you need both, because you need a mechanism to change that culture and to make that change.
What's your message to Josh then?
The message to Josh is keep working with me. He is. To be fair to him, I know for a fact he cares, you know, but obviously he's working within the constraints of Whitehall and so forth. But let's just keep working together and just let's get this done, because we shouldn't be waiting any longer.
We are out of time, but I did just want to ask a little bit about your own experience, and I'll be led by you on this. You mentioned, obviously, your family before, and, you know, we've spoken to care leavers before in this programme who have talked about moving around the whole time, like not having the sense of a parent or a mum and dad on their side, no matter what. I just wondered if you wanted to just really explain, I guess, what it is like growing up in care.
It's hard. By the time I'd left care, I'd lived in over 100 places.
100 places?
Over 100 places. I just wanted to be with my mum, but the social care, and they were probably right, they didn't want me to do that. I kept running away. You know, I was placed into foster care early on and abused in the care system, and then I told the social services and they didn't believe me. My sister was abused. You know, nowadays it's a lot safer, but earlier, you know, when I was in care, it wasn't safe at all. But kids, they're counting down. Right now, these children, 16, 17 years old, and they're not counting and looking forward to being 18. They're counting down to when all that scaffolding is removed and they're alone and isolated. And that's exactly what Nanita did. She counted down. She told social care how she was going to die, and she told them that she would be going in front of a train, and then what did they do? They moved into supported accommodation near some train tracks.
Yes,
now, how is that a good system?
It's not. Terry, thank you for shining a light on it and all the work you do. Nick, likewise, thanks so much. We're going to switch focus altogether now, turning our attention now to gaming, computer gaming, which is estimated to generate more revenue than both the music and film industries combined here in the UK. Well, this week is the London Games Festival, and creators and innovators will come together to show how games can inspire positive social change. The latest figures show UK consumers spend £8.76 billion on video games. That's for 2025. It's a 7.4% increase on the year before. And to put it in perspective, the UK and Ireland film box office was £1.7 billion in 2025, although that might be just for at the cinema, not revenue generated from the film and TV business more broadly. Anyway, let's talk about it all with the Games for Change London Summit curator, George Osborne, who's here. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me along.
So gauge for us how big we are as a country in gaming, which, as we've kind of laid out there, is obviously a booming industry.
Sure. So the UK sits somewhere roughly 6th or 7th in the world in terms of biggest consumer market, and it's one of the probably top 5 markets in terms of the creations of video games as well. It's got a long storied history, so it's one of the oldest clusters, so it's been running for about 40 years, and it's got a great track record in terms of local creation, so not just in London, but places like Leamington Spa, Dundee, and up in Yorkshire. But at the moment, I'd say the UK games industry is under a bit of pressure. There's some real international growth taking place. China's taken the lead globally. Saudi Arabia has been investing tens of billions of dollars into its industry. And I think the industry really needs to be looking at what comes next for the UK sector to make sure we push forwards.
And what type of changes do you want to see?
I think there's a few things. I mean, one of the things I know that a lot of people in the industry have been talking about is immigration policy and saying that it's frankly not fit for purpose, that it prevents people who are from high-skilled backgrounds coming here to get the kinds of roles they need in the industry. On tax reliefs, I think people want to see the kind of similar reliefs you see within the film industry. There isn't one for independent game developers, but there is one for independent film. And I think the country lacks a national video game strategy. You know, you're talking about if you want to be the biggest in the world, you have to do what the best do. And unfortunately, Saudi Arabia has one that was penned by the Crown Prince. So until we have that level of ambition, I don't think we're going to fully unlock the true value of the UK games industry.
That's interesting. It doesn't have the same tax breaks as film and TV. Other side of it, it also doesn't get the same attention, I think it's fair to say, as, say, social media does for the negative impacts it has on children. You know, we're not talking about gaming bans day in, day out. How big a negative impact does gaming have? And do, let's say, for under-16s, do under-16s use it too much?
Well, so I mean, on the social media point, games platforms were actually named in the social media ban consultation. So one of the things the government did was identify that as an area that they were going to investigate. And Ofcom also regulates online video game spaces under the Online Safety Act because they feature user-to-user communications. So a lot of games companies are already within the tent when it comes to those kinds of things. But when it comes to younger players and particularly protecting them, you know, the industry has a variety of frameworks in place, things like age ratings, an entire system of content moderation to make sure the chat is being looked after. But the thing that I tend to say about it is, when you're looking at video games, you've got to treat them as like the public parks and public places and spaces of the digital age. And I think one of the things we've not really seen... Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, I've literally written a book about this that's coming out in a couple of months. And one of the key points around this is the fact that video games act like football stadiums. They get people to gather together to talk and socialise. And that's massively important in terms of the kind of cultural conversation that shapes both what's going on in the UK and around the world, but what it means is that we don't tend to have a conversation in society about how do we foster the correct standards within games, the kind of things we aspire to. And yesterday at the Games for Change Summit, we had the Christchurch call along to help foster a conversation around how we can reduce things like misogyny within game spaces to go and help the industry out. So I think there's a cross-society approach.
But presumably you wouldn't argue that it's better for kids to play computer games than it is to go to the playground or play sports together in the park?
I'd say it's part of the mix. So there was some fascinating research.
But this is interesting because it's all on the framing of it. I mean, by saying part of the mix, you're probably acknowledging what I said, that it's not as important as it. And I would think that over the last couple of decades, I'm sure you have the data, the amount of time one spends in bucket one, screens and gaming, has grown massively, and the amount of time kids spend out in person with each other physically has declined.
Yeah, I mean, if you look towards...
So the mix is getting worse?
I would say that the mix is changing. I mean, I'd say that certainly video games have become a part of that mix, and it provides something really important in terms of digital connection. You know, yesterday at the Games for Change Summit, we had a Norwegian politician along, Robert Steen, whose son Matt was severely disabled, and during his life he couldn't engage in physical exercise. Robert thought that his son had lived a lonely, friendless life, and when he died, he discovered that his son's World of Warcraft community had actually been really close friends with him to the point they flew out to Oslo for his funeral. It provides a different form of connection, but, you know, when you're saying about getting that mix right, I certainly don't like to spend all of my time indoors playing games. I play five-side football with my friends. I go out running. It's important to have the balance, and I think that's the thing the industry really needs to work on.
It's a wonderful individual example you just gave, but do you accept for children as a whole the mix is getting worse?
I would say no, to be honest. One of the things that I would say is that children need spaces to play. And at the conference yesterday, we had UNICEF along, speaking with Lego, talking about how important it was to design spaces with the rights of children in mind. And one of the things they said was, it's really important that you protect children's privacy, you protect their rights in terms of keeping them safe online, but you also protect their right to play. You know, one of UNICEF's fundamental rights is the right to play, and that applies as much to digital space as it does physical.
George Osborne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about the rise in shoplifting. It's something the Lib Dems are focusing on. We're going to find out what solutions they want to put forward.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Middle East correspondent. We've just entered Gaza. The vista out there is complete destruction. I'll always remember going into Gaza City during the war. All around us was destruction and the sounds of battle. I witnessed the scars of the October the 7th attacks, burnt out homes, bullet holes in walls and bloodstains on the floor.
People were murdered, people were kidnapped.
The Israelis insist that many of these prisoners are terrorists, but here the Palestinians consider them a blend of freedom fighters and political prisoners. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Okay, there's a lot of firing going on.
Can you
you explain to me why? We're journalists, sir.
Let's go. Watch way. Right, we're going to get in. Right, get in. Get in. Get in.
We just want to ask you a few questions about your involvement with ISIS. Next step for them, quite often, is getting on a boat and sailing illegally over into Europe.
Es un solo procesamiento, una sola sacada.
Whoa. Oh my goodness. Whoa. Oh my goodness. If you weren't affected, you'd be a bit of a strange person.
Turn off the camera. Turn around and go away.
Okay, but
listen, I told you 3 times.
They saw 2 guys, 2 bad people.
There's an absolutely packed dinghy.
But that is what it's like. Sometimes you have to put in an awful lot of hard work. It's worth doing. I suppose it is what we do.
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent. We gather, analyse and visualise data to tell data-driven stories.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting. The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Well, shoplifting, of course, is one of those issues that is so visible, and I think it's really getting a bit of political momentum behind having to do something about it, including from the Liberal Democrats. Max Wilkinson, the Lib Dem spokesperson for Home Affairs, joins us now. Great to have you on the programme. So you've got some research today showing how shoplifting is an increasing problem. What has it shown?
Morning, Sophie. Thanks for having me on. It shows a pretty startling increase in shoplifting since the COVID pandemic period, up by about 130% and more. But more concerningly than that, perhaps, is that only 1 in 5 shoplifting incidents across the country is actually being subject to any kind of action. And in London specifically, the success rates in terms of prosecutions is down at around about 7%. Now, we think this proves the need for a return to proper community policing, for a return to having police desks in the community, perhaps in supermarkets, pubs and other community buildings, just so people have that reassurance that on their local high streets, in their local communities, there's going to be a police presence. And also, of course, when we see police in our local area, if we are criminals, we will probably think that that's a deterrent and we're less likely to walk into the local shop and ransack it, empty the shelves of goods that we think we might be able to sell on later on. Yeah.
The Boss of Iceland has recently called for security guards in shops, supermarkets to have access to pepper spray, to batons. I was in Spain recently and I did actually notice the security guards in some supermarkets with the kind of batons. Is that something that you'd support?
Well, we've got to be very cautious about suggesting that there needs to be any kind of tooling up around this. We think that the right way to deal with this is actually to give those retail workers and security guards the support they need from the local police. And of course, the police are being failed here as well in many cases because local community level police teams aren't being resourced as well as they should be. So we also think there is an issue here around the way the government is looking at high streets as well. Of course, a lot of decisions have been made in the last couple of budgets which have made it much more difficult for high street shops to survive. Things like the employers' national insurance contributions rise, for example, and the way in which the government is ignoring the problems that the hospitality and leisure sector has, for example. So there are many things that should be done here, but at the heart of it, we need a return to old-fashioned community policing where we see police on our streets and in our communities much more often.
Can I ask you about our top story today, which is that the government has confirmed that there has been this contingency planning done into food shortages due to the Strait of Hormuz, carbon dioxide in particular. They say that there's no reason to panic, that it's actually under control at the minute. The Lib Dems are calling for the guidance, the contingency plans to be published. I guess my question to you, is that really a responsible thing to ask for, given that, you know, the real risk here could also be panic buying?
Of course, as Liberals and as Liberal Democrats, it won't surprise you to hear that we are in favour of an element of transparency. People deserve to know what the government is looking at and what the government is planning for. Of course, nobody wants there to be anything like panic buying, and we're not suggesting that that should be a response. But of course, if the government is suggesting in the background that there might be problems in future, I think people have a right to know. But more importantly, Sophie, what we need to see here is the government using all of its might to try to bring more pressure on Donald Trump. And we've seen the problems that are being caused in this country by the recklessness of Donald Trump, and the Liberal Democrats have been at the forefront of actually calling out this reckless and illegal war, while, of course, Reform and the Conservatives have been very keen to say that we should have joined the conflict in the first place.
OK, we're perfectly wrapped up. 15 seconds to go. Max Wilkinson, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
We'll be right back after this short break.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access.
Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget.
Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Good morning, it is 9 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Rich and Frost.
With Sophie and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
The looming spectre of food shortages in the summer if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed in a worst-case scenario plan.
Prime Minister hauls social media bosses into Downing Street and tells them to step up and take responsibility to make things safer for kids online.
An urgent review is launched into the deaths of care leavers after a Sky News investigation exposes a broken system.
Also this hour, we're speaking to the classicist and broadcaster Mary Beard about how ancient history can make sense of events today.
We'll also be looking at the threat posed by deep-fake videos to British politics and elections.
A very good morning. The government has confirmed to us that officials have been quietly drawing up reasonable worst-case scenario contingency plans in case the conflict in the Middle East leads to food shortages here in the UK.
So we've already been reporting on the prospect of fuel shortages in recent weeks, but the blockade of shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz could also impact the supply of carbon dioxide, critical to the food industry.
The Business Secretary told us the public should be reassured by the government's behind-the-scenes planning.
On carbon dioxide specifically, because we've talked about farming, we've talked breweries as well, I'm right in saying, I think as well, because they kind of add the fizz to drinks, beer, maybe for the World Cup, perhaps a concern for people. Like, how long kind of stockpiles do we have of
people,
this stuff?
At this moment, this is not a concern for our economy.
OK.
I can reassure people of that.
You'll be able to get a beer for the World Cup.
If that changes, we will be... I will speak about it and I will make an announcement about it. But for this moment in time, there is not the concern because I have taken the action.
OK, thank you. And look, it is, like you say, you never want to be alarmist with the stuff, but it's also important to kind of get the information out to people
If
as well.
any of these things change, I will be upfront with the public about it in advance so that we can prepare. But right now, people should go on as they are, enjoying beer, enjoying their meats, enjoying all the salads. But also, there are critical uses for CO2. MRI scanning, for example, water purification. It's involved in our nuclear industry, our civil nuclear power industry. So some defensive uses for it as well. There's lots of needs for CO2. So these are the reasons why I took it so seriously way back just 6 months ago, not just in the last few weeks.
Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Lucy McDade, who's here with us. In a way, although it's really underlines the impact of the closure of the Strait, it's kind of reassuring the government is also looking at this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said before, I think we would be criticising the government if it came to light in a few months' time that they hadn't been looking at this potential scenario. What it is that they have been, I suppose, role-playing a situation in which, come June, a peace deal hasn't been agreed and carbon dioxide levels are 18% of what they are now. And this is because, when it comes to food in the supermarkets, for example, carbon dioxide is used to extend the shelf life of the food that we buy. Bags of pre-made salad, ready-made meals. But it's also, it would affect the hospitality sector, breweries. Carbon dioxide is what makes your drinks fizzy in the pub. So the government is looking at this scenario, but they do very much insist that this is what they should be doing. And because they are looking at it, people shouldn't need to worry, if that makes sense.
Some good news for the government on the GDP data this morning, albeit short-lived.
Yeah.
Coming in
0.5%, something that they're obviously pleased to point to a bit.
Pleased to point to a bit, and of course the government would be pointing to the fact it's positive news. But of course Rachel Reeves is in Washington. She went into a meeting with the US Treasury Secretary yesterday with this really quite miserable forecast for the UK that its economy is going to be the worst hit out of the world's major economies because of the conflict in Iran. So they will point towards this good figure. And they do say that the work that they have been doing to make the economy more stable is helping us within this conflict. But I think those arguments are quite difficult when we're in the situation that we're currently in with the Middle East, and it's just continuing to go on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's almost like a glimpse into a parallel life that we could have had, but we do not have, which maybe makes it even worse. Lucy, thank you very much indeed.
Well, on the topic of those meetings in Washington that the Chancellor has been having, they've announced that they will help businesses with electricity bills coming from the increase in the Iran war. The Chancellor made the announcement during IMF meetings in Washington and promised there would be no rise in household bills.
There is a bit of a catch, though, because the help isn't going to come in for another year. Yeah, yes, exactly. And some businesses are worried that the conflict could have a huge impact on their profit margins. Before then, of course, our economics and data editor Ed Conway sat down with the IMF's chief economist, who warned we could face a global recession if the war drags on.
Since the outbreak of war, there's been one of these big overarching questions which has been kind of haunting people both here at the International Monetary Fund and elsewhere around the world, which is the question of just how bad is this likely to get for the global economy? How would this stack up versus other crises that we've had in the past? And now we're getting closer to an answer to that. We've spoken to the chief economist here at the IMF, who's given us a somewhat depressing but perhaps realistic impression of what this actually means for the global economy, and in short, it's not pretty. And it would constitute what the IMF would normally categorise as a global recession. This is the chief economist of the IMF talking through some of those scenarios.
We decided to release 3 scenarios. We have what we call our reference forecast, which is assuming a relatively benign, short-lived conflict that would end about now, and from which they will start to rebuild and reopen the straits, and oil and energy would start flowing. And under that relatively modest scenario, we're still seeing a significant impact on global growth. And the severe scenario, where energy prices in that scenario remain elevated not just this year, but going even higher into next year, so pretty serious disruption there, $125 a barrel average price for 2027, then in that scenario, growth would fall to 2% in 26 and 27, and inflation will reach about 6%.
And that's kind of, 2% is kind of, that's global recession territory.
Well, it's sometimes referred to as that way. It would certainly feel like a recession for a lot of people around the world. 2% is a growth number we've only had 4 times since 1980. And 2 of those times were times of global crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and the COVID-19 pandemic. It could get really bad, but we're not there yet. We're all hopeful that there will be a swift resolution, that the ceasefire will take hold and continue, that there will be a reopening of the strait in the near future. And of course, every day that this situation continues, we don't have the shipments of oil and gas and other products coming out of the Gulf, then we're drifting towards the adverse scenario, and maybe even worse.
So that's the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund. Worth saying, the UK got downgraded more than any other G7 nation in terms of its economic growth forecast. Part of that is the fact that Britain is more sensitive to imported energy costs than many other countries around the world. That's something that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says that she's very aware of and is trying to do something about. She has a new programme which is designed to try to reduce costs, particularly for high energy-intensive businesses. The only problem with this new programme that she says will extend to 10,000 companies is that it's going to take some time before it kicks in. And so it's not going to be an immediate solution to people facing higher energy costs at the moment. So those in industry groups have been quite sceptical about how much that's actually going to make a difference for their members.
Conway reporting, Dan.
Now, there are some positive signs that a ceasefire could be reached in southern Lebanon, where Israel has continued to carry out strikes despite the ceasefire between the US and Iran.
So in the last few hours, Donald Trump posted this on Truth Social, trying to get a little breathing room between Israel and Lebanon. It's been a long time since the 2 leaders have spoken, like 34 years. It will happen tomorrow. Nice.
Let's bring in Sally, who has more for us live from Dubai. Is there genuine optimism about these talks, Sally?
I mean, yes, there is optimism. It's certainly very hopeful, but there's also a bit of confusion at this stage, Wilf. We're hearing different things from both sides, which is not a surprise. You know, Donald Trump, the first to announce that talks would take place between the leaders of Israel and Lebanon today, as he announced on social media. And then we heard from an Israeli politician on Army radio earlier today, who also confirmed that Benjamin Netanyahu would be holding a call today with the Lebanese president, which sounded hugely hopeful and extremely significant. And then a Lebanese official has since said, you know, that's not happening. We don't know anything in Lebanon about a call between Lebanese leaders with Benjamin Netanyahu today. So a lot of confusion, and you know, despite America clearly putting some pressure on Israel to continue these diplomatic efforts, the talks alone between both sides are proving challenging, let alone trying to sort out some sort of ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu has said he's going to continue to intensify strikes on a certain area of southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, of course, have said, you know, even if there is some sort of deal, we won't recognise it. But at least they are still attempting to talk about having talks when it comes to Lebanon, one of the most, urgent issues in this war. And of course, the other very urgent issue is the Strait of Hormuz. And it does sound like the US and Iran could be holding a second round of talks in Islamabad next week. We haven't had that confirmed yet, but Pakistani negotiators have visited Tehran in the last 24 hours to deliver Washington's latest message. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, echoing Donald Trump's comments, saying, you know, that a deal is looking good, but she wouldn't be drawn on whether this ceasefire, which is only due to last now for another 6 days, whether that will be extended. But perhaps in quite a show of confidence in the ceasefire, the UAE announced yesterday that schools will be returning to in-person learning from Monday, much to the relief of parents here who've been homeschooling their children for weeks now. And I don't think there's any suggestion that the UAE government would be making that call if they weren't fairly confident that this war wasn't about to immediately escalate. Now, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, the US blockade remains in place. US Central Command saying that essentially they have stopped now Iranian traffic vessels to and from Iranian ports, which was the objective of the American blockade. And in a development, Donald Trump has also announced on one of his Truth Social posts that Chinese tankers will be allowed to pass. Now, that hasn't been the case. There was a US-sanctioned Chinese tanker that was seen turning around during this American blockade in the first day that it was in place. It seems that that has now changed. And Donald Trump said it's because China has promised not to give Iran weapons to use in this war. And you know, in true Donald Trump fashion, he said, when I see President Xi in a few weeks' time, because they are due to hold a summit, which is still going ahead. He said, I'll give him a big fat hug. It's extraordinary stuff. But he also did warn in the same post, this beats fighting, but don't forget, we're really good at it and we could return to fighting. I'm paraphrasing. He did say that, and I think that's an important point to mention, because while these diplomatic efforts are still underway and proving fairly hopeful on both fronts, there are still more military assets being moved to the Middle East. There's a third aircraft carrier currently on the way here, and more Marines on the way from California, which are due to be in place in the region by the end of this month. And it feels very reminiscent of where we were in February, where both sides were holding talks in Geneva while there was this big American military build-up here in the region. So I think it does reinforce the sense that all options are still on the table for Donald Trump. Things can change very quickly when it comes to this war, but certainly at the moment they are still trying to find some sort of diplomatic solution.
Sally, great stuff. Thanks so much. And by the way, oil prices up a little bit this morning, up 1.5%, 1.6%, $96 on Brent. So after a good few days, just ticking up a tad today, but nothing too significant.
We're going to talk social media next, because the Prime Minister is summoning what's been described as senior leaders from some of the world's biggest social media companies to Downing Street, so Meta, Google, TikTok, X. They'll meet the Prime Minister and also the Technology Secretary in number 10.
Keir Starmer's calling on big tech to step up and take responsibility to protect young people and keep them safe online. It's, of course, as MPs continue to consult on whether to ban social media for under 16s. Molly's here with some of the details of why this is sort of happening all of a sudden and exactly what's on the agenda for these talks.
Well, I think it's happening all of a sudden because they're under a huge amount of pressure from all directions on this. This is something that really gets the public exercise and gets public concern, because we know that there are so many illustrations of the harmful content that kids are facing when they're going online at the moment. And there's actually a YouGov poll back in December. I just had a look, and overwhelmingly the public support a ban following Australia on social media for under 16. So I think that's where the pressure's coming from. In terms of what's on the agenda, it's almost like what's not on the agenda. There's so much that they could be putting to these social media bosses. I have had my eyes on the feeds, on the cameras to see who's going in. We haven't had sight of them yet, but we are expecting this meeting to get underway in the next half an hour or so. But it's regulation, it's the Online Safety Act, it's blocking harmful content, it's the measures that they're taking to try and take action in those areas. And to that effect, the language has been pretty stark. I'm going to read you a little bit of what the Prime Minister's had to say ahead of this meeting with these tech giants. He said, "Parents rightly expect action and fast. That's why we've already taken the powers needed to move quickly once our consultation ends. I will take whatever steps necessary to keep children safe online. Today is about making sure social media companies step up and take responsibility. The consequences of failing to act are stark. We owe it to parents and to the next generation to put children's safety first, because they won't forgive us if we don't." And we'll know that there's a huge amount of discussion at the moment about potentially banning social media for under 16s. We saw Australia go that way in December. The government's view officially is that a default ban, as we've seen with this Lord's Amendment that they actually voted against MPs last night for the second time, an outright ban, is that actually a ban is premature at this stage, and that's because there seem to be hanging quite a lot on this consultation that they've got going on at the moment, and there are thousands of consultations, but you'd like to think that this would be one that they're looking at quite closely in terms of the public's view and the view of parents and young people as well. And I think they'll be looking at potentially, can they get away with, if not bringing in a ban, well then looking at slightly less dramatic measures like overnight curfews, looking at how they use VPNs and how they operate so that kids can't circumnavigate protections that are put in place online, and restricting kind of the more addictive features. It's not, as we were saying before, something that is so obviously split along party lines. We had Peter Kyle, he used to be Tech Secretary, he's now Business Secretary, but he was basically saying that a ban should be a very last resort. So it feels very much up in the air, the way that we go with this at the moment, but certainly they'll have a lot of questions that the Tech Secretary and the Prime Minister will be wanting to put to these leaders this morning.
All right, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Now, a new book is exploring the connections between the ancient past and the present to try and help us make sense of those who lived long ago, and also, frankly, to make sense of what's going on in the present as well, I guess, always useful, given recent events.
Mary Beard's title of her new book, Talking Classics, The Shock of the Old, aims to challenge readers to think about our own world differently, as Sophie was saying there, drawing parallels from the past. And we're delighted to say that Mary Beard joins us now. A very good morning to you.
Hello, hello.
Is this the main aim of your book, to compare and contrast, or is it to also inspire people to look through history?
I think it's more about inspiration. I think that ancient Greece and Rome has got a very boring press, actually. People kind of think that it's very worthy, but it's all a bit traditional and not very exciting. And I think that my aim is to say, look at this again. Actually, the ancient world, the Greeks and Romans, they're not kind of boring. They're not, they're not the sort of old-fashioned Boris Johnson-style Greeks and Romans. They are dead exciting. They make you think about yourself differently. They give you a different perspective on the world, and they sometimes shock you. They actually are shocking. So have another look before you write them off as a bit dull. That's the message.
I'm interested with what you say there about they make you think differently about yourselves and they give you a different perspective on the world. What do you mean by that?
Well, I suppose one obvious example would be to go back to the 5th century BC in classical Athens and look at the kind of things that were being discussed then on stage in ancient tragedy. I mean, one very obvious, brilliant play is a play by Euripides, Medea, about a woman called Medea who is abandoned by her faithless slime bag husband and then kills her kids. Now, I think that actually simply thinking about how people 2,500 years or more could start to grapple with questions that we're still grappling with. I don't think they've got the answers, but what they're doing is say, hey, people have been here before, they've had ideas, they've thought about this hard and complicatedly, and they can help us do the same, actually.
I'm really interested, Mary, about, you know, this growth in recent years and decades of various more autocratic leaders. We can look from enemies to allies alike. But we often then use the word monarch-like tendencies today. But I wonder whether we really should be saying and comparing them to the emperors that you write about.
Yeah, emperor-like tendencies. I mean, the commonest question I get at the moment is which Roman emperor is Donald Trump most like? And I always want to say, look, he's not really like any of them. You know, I think that would be actually an insult to the emperors and to Trump, really, on both sides. No, he is not just like Nero. But what I think you can do, if you go back to see how Romans themselves wrote about autocracy under imperial rule, you can see things that help us think about ourselves. And I mean, I think the clearest example is probably the Roman historian Tacitus in the 2nd century CE. And his analysis of the early Roman emperors is really founded on the way they destroyed language. I mean, it's a bit Orwellian. You know, they made language not mean what it had meant. And I think, you know, when we see some of the things that Trump sounds off with, and we're always told, oh, don't take him literally, take him seriously, don't take him literally. I think we are there back in a world in which power, the extremes of power, are polluting what we say. You know, civilization's going to die. No, it's not.
I think this is really interesting because also I guess, you know, you think about the Greeks and the Romans as like the power of rhetoric, right? And as you say, as journalists, we're always told, just ignore what he's saying on Truth Social, you know, look at what he does. But I guess what you're saying is actually what he says is also important.
Yeah, I mean, politics is partly, not wholly, but it's partly about the words we use, not just about what we do. It's how we choose to discuss. And I think if you go back to the ancient world and you see their anxieties about how words were debased, or their anxieties about clever orators being able to persuade people to take the wrong course because they were so clever at speaking. It's impossible, I think, not to see some kind of, you know, message for us, which goes far beyond whether the American president is one particular emperor or another.
I'm really interested you said the speaking aspect, because presumably the only way they could really connect with voters was mass gatherings and just being the greatest public speakers of all time without the technology that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, there was some written communication, but relatively small. But there certainly wasn't the kind of media that, you know, we're used to, like what we're doing here. And so for the ancients, and partly this is why they were so good at analysing spoken language, that was what they had. You know, if you got up, let's say, in 5th century Athens in the assembly, and you started to tell a whole load of plausible lies, that's really dangerous. And they were forced, I think, to look at the way spoken language works that we're not forced to do. And I think it's, you know, it'd be a good idea if we got back and thought about how we say things and what we mean and the difficulty of communication. It is difficult. And Greeks and Romans knew that.
It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. There's so many parallels as well. There's another question. I wrestled with whether to ask you this, I'll be honest. But look, I found you personally a very refreshing and inspiring woman to watch and as a broadcaster, right, as well as all the great history work you do too. You have faced some misogyny for it. I remember the AA Guild, you know, she should be kept away from cameras altogether. Yeah. I've been thinking about this a bit recently because of AI. You know, my social media feeds are full of idealised fake women, you know, right? You know, we've done a piece recently on an AI-generated Instagram historian. Do you worry we're going a bit backwards on some of this stuff?
I hope not. I mean, I think that, just to go back to the AA Gill incident, in the end, he didn't come very well out of that. I mean, I'm not sure I did, but he sure didn't.
You came out very well on that, I should say, by the way.
But I think that one of the things, when we've got over our, this moment when we're all kind of getting very excited or terrified about AI, I think we'll come back to a moment when we see that reality is more important, that we will value what's real. We'll value people who look real, who are speaking themselves, not from an AI-generated script. That we will go back to that. The moment of reality will return, and I think perhaps we shouldn't be too worried about the long-term influence of AI.
I love that. That's great.
Miriam, one question finally for me, which I wanted to ask about Latin in schools, because I did Latin and we would debate. We're both supporters of widely reading and trying to, round yourselves as much as possible, and variety and depth is a spice of life and all that. Is it fair to say though that teaching Latin to kids is less useful than other subjects, or not? What's your view on that?
Wolf, I'm not going to agree with that.
Surely maths and English are slightly more important.
It depends what you mean by useful, doesn't it?
Okay.
I mean, it depends whether you're going to need it to ask for a packet of peas in the supermarket tomorrow. Latin wouldn't do you much good. If you're saying, how does it help you think? Again, going back to the sense of analysing different cultures, how does it make you think about the way people thought differently in the ancient world? Does Latin, does putting things in Latin, does thinking about how Latin expressed things, does that help you see how other people's perspectives are built up? And I think one thing we might say, as of now, at this point in the 21st century, one of the things we sure need is people who can see things from a different point of view. And learning languages, not just Latin, I would say the same for French, German, Mandarin, whatever, but Latin is a very good way of doing that. We need to think what it would be like to see things differently. That's democracy for you guys.
I love it. It's been great to talk. AI is going to do your maths for you anyway, right? So you don't need maths anymore.
Yes, that's right.
Mary, thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to have you on. Really interesting to get your perspective.
Thanks very much.
We are going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about deep fakes and how they are potentially influencing elections. The response from the authorities. We'll be right back.
bring you the latest pictures from Germany. So these are rescue teams in northern Germany, and they are working very, very hard to help save the life of a humpback whale. You can see it there in the shot, but this humpback whale has been stranded in very, very shallow water in the Baltic Sea, and at the minute it is a real race in time to save the life of that whale. It's a male humpback. It's repeatedly stranded and freed itself in Germany in the last month, but now stranded in the Baltic Sea, 10-metre long humpback whale there.
Bring you more if we have it later on. Now, the Electoral Commission is launching a crackdown on AI deepfakes in election campaigns as there are growing concerns about their impact on voters.
So in an exclusive interview with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, the Commission's chief said there are some really tricky negotiations ahead with political parties, but also social media companies as well, to try and get a grip on the issue. Here's Sam's report.
I call for a general election.
Hate Liverpool. Why have fake videos with politicians like that got people worried? Well, I've just come from an interview with the head of the Electoral Commission. The watchdog boss says he needs to take action now.
We've seen some horrendous examples in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, really around the world. The one that really struck home for us was in the Irish presidential election last year, a deepfake of one of the presidential candidates apparently withdrawing from the election race.
It is with great regret that I announce the withdrawal of my candidacy and the ending of my campaign.
No, Catherine!
What's your thought on that?
First of all, it's incredibly believable. It would put off some voters potentially going and voting, and that's what we really don't want to see in any British election.
And what's your lesson from seeing that?
You've got to move very quickly. So our system will be running all the time. It's going to try to catch these deep fakes before they've spread too far.
We showed him deep fakes to work out what will and won't be stopped in future.
I need you, Jamie. I need you to find a way to make children's lives utterly miserable.
Well, Keir, years ago I took away their turkey Twizzlers. This time we can take away their fish and chips.
So that is the Prime Minister fate, saying something he didn't do, didn't say. Why isn't that a matter for you, do you think?
I think the system will catch that, but we'll look at it, and then there are some tricky judgments here. That's clearly satirical, it's humorous, it's intended to be. It's not quite clear it's going to mislead many voters. We're really focused on attempts by somebody, and it could be in the UK, and it could be abroad, to try to actually undermine our democratic process by, for example, saying that the election's been called off or a candidate has withdrawn. Those ones we will act on really, really fast.
He thinks it's a problem, but will everyone take action to stop it getting worse? Will you name which social media companies at the moment sound more sceptical or reluctant to take up down?
I don't think I want to get into exactly which companies they are. We're trying to work with all of them.
The bottom line is there have been deepfake AI videos that have tried to disrupt elections around the world, and social media channels have carried them without taking them down.
Exactly. I think this is going to be a big conversation with the social media companies. If we find a serious deepfake and we go to them, we will expect them to take it down quite quickly.
So those companies on notice. It's not just searching online. The Electoral Commission is asking parties to sign up to not make deepfakes. But will that happen? My impression, talking to some of the political parties, is that there is a concern about signing up to something too broad. So this is quite a difficult area to get them to agree when it comes down to the fine wording.
I think you're right. I think this is why it's going to take us the rest of the year to really work this through. There are really legitimate concerns here about not binding their hands, about not restraining them from using new technologies, and about keeping open a really vibrant, robust political debate. That's absolutely our aim as well.
Given just how influential AI is going to be at the next election, that's going to be a tough negotiation to succeed from your point of view, isn't it?
Well, we're going to give it our best shot. They're going to use AI for all sorts of things, as we all are in our daily lives. But I think it's the deliberate use of it to generate video and audio that really misleads voters. And that is not, I hope, going to be a large part of what they want to use it for.
At the moment, AI deepfakes are a problem abroad rather than here. Can we stop that changing before the time of the next general election?
Well, Sam's here with us now following that report. I mean, is this the start of a problem getting much bigger, or do you think they'll be able to contain it?
Well, AI in politics, like in absolutely everything else, is going to transform things, and people don't know quite what. And I think by the time of the next general election, we're going to be trying to grapple with AI in all sorts of different ways. So the Electoral Commission are trying to get ahead of things with the issue of videos. We were talking just a moment ago, you know, Yalda Hakim's deepfake AI video, I think, was a wake-up call to all of us about how our images can be manipulated. In the Hungarian elections, they were doing AI deepfakes of Sky News content, and we're out trying to find examples of that. It's often scrubbed pretty quickly after it happens. But it's not just going to be AI videos that we're talking about. We're going to be talking about social media algorithms. If that's biased for one party or another, how do you deal with that? And then AI, kind of those big chatbots themselves, if they give answers that prefer or don't prefer one party or another, can parties manipulate those? How do we account for them in the electoral process? We're at the foothills of an incredible journey, and that journey could determine the outcome of future elections. It's massive.
Oh, God, my head is hurting even thinking about all the different possibilities and the consequences of some of their stuff. The other thing is, Sam, and I know you'll have done this too, like talking to a few MPs at the last election who were quite shocked at the outcome in their own seats, unpredictability things, and saying that so much of this was going on in closed WhatsApp groups, these kind of arguments, conversations, fake news that was happening. I mean, I guess this could just happen on speed almost.
It can. There's a problem. And there's a problem that the Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission is quite upfront about. He can deal with lies, misinformation. But Sophie, you of all people knows what happens to the truth in an election campaign. And it's hard if you're a watchdog or a public body to be the guardians of what is true and what's not. Misinformation on one level is another person's powerfully put argument. And so any public body's got to tread a fine line. So he was quite clear, those fake news videos of Keir Starmer, Crewkern Gazette as it's known, the online platform that does satirical videos, they're lies. They show Keir Starmer saying things he didn't say in a quite believable fashion. The Electoral Commission will not take action against that because that's free speech and satire. But where does the line come? And just because it's not true doesn't necessarily mean that they step in. It was the example that you saw at the start where the Irish presidential candidate was shown in a fake video to have pulled out, thereby changing the nature and the facts of the election. That's when everybody kind of lost their mind and it really started, they worried that would change the course of the election.
Sam, thank you. We're out of time. There's an awful lot to talk about on this. We'll have you on again to talk about it as well. Sticking with AI, lots of us, of course, using it, particularly in the workplace. It's increasingly become a tool in recruitment as well. So we can talk to that with our next guest.
Yeah, let's begin a discussion with Alex Stanwell, Director of Brand and Communication at CV Library. Good to see you.
Good morning.
One of the things that's really interesting about this is actually not so much the way that AI is used to research, but some people show up for a job interview and the conversation is with AI. Or is that an exaggeration?
That's certainly happening in parts. And so we speak to lots of job seekers and we speak to lots of recruiters, and the job market is tough right now. I think every person who's looked for a job at the moment will agree with that. And that's made worse because they think, oh, well, I've applied for a job and there's an AI bot that is screening my CV and I'm getting screened out before I've even had a chance to speak to a human. Or if I do get through and then I go and have an interview, it's not actually with a human, it is with a bot on a camera.
Not physically.
Yeah, in some cases you can be interviewed by a robot, and that could be quite off-putting. And it's no surprise to say that when we spoke to job seekers, quite a lot of them said that they didn't really like that and wanted to jump out of the process. But it's a difficult market at the moment, so you might not want to, but you might feel like you have to, because otherwise you're not going to get the role.
The whole interview by a robot thing is the kind of eye-catching thing. But you were saying there about AI screening applications in the first place, and this is something that I find worrying, because if you are a job seeker without a traditional background, maybe you don't have a degree, but you're amazing, then is there a risk that AI just gets rid of you straight away?
Well, I think that's the problem that we're seeing emerge in the recruitment space at the moment. You have lots and lots and lots of applications coming through for business at the moment. There can be more than 300 applications for a role at the moment because the market's quite difficult. So recruiters are saying, how do I deal with this volume, particularly if they're recruiting for entry-level jobs and they've got maybe 100 roles and they get 300 applications for each of those roles. That's a lot of work. So there's a temptation, obviously, for recruiters to say, well, how do I streamline that? Can I use some tools to do a first screen of the CVs and only give me the ones that meet the certain criteria? The problem with that is you're losing that human intuition, but for entry-level roles, for roles where maybe I need a driver, do they just have a driving licence? That could be relatively straightforward to do. More nuanced roles where there may be some transferable skills that could come across, which some of that's getting lost. And I think we hear from candidates that they're saying, well, look, I'm getting screened out before I've even had the chance to make my case. And when we spoke to recruiters, actually about a third said that yeah, they think they're losing out on quality candidates. And that's because either they're getting screened out too early, or candidates are dropping out of the process because AI is being used, or the other side of this is candidates using AI on their CVs, and all the CVs are looking the same. And you're getting really commoditised CVs, and you're losing the personality in there. So it's making it much harder for recruiters to actually identify who are the good people and who are the not.
I mean, I was going to ask how important CVs themselves remain in an age where you can kind of look people up quite easily on their LinkedIn or other social media platforms, or more open that just what you do in your job is kind of quite out there already.
Yeah, but there still needs to be some kind of way of putting all that together. And we certainly don't think the CV is going to die off anytime soon. And and it depends. Like the market goes through ups and downs. At the moment, you've got loads of people wanting a job, and so you're blessed with lots of applications. This is one of the problems that we're dealing with. But if the market comes back, actually what you'll find is a lot of recruiters will go out searching for candidates, and then they go to a place like CV Library where we've got a CV database, and you go and you look through and you can find the people there or onto other.
But what's your number one tip if you're doing a CV, you want to make it stand out from all the AI CVs? What should you put in there?
Well, the best thing you should do is make sure it's aligned to the job description for the job, and that is laborious, because if you're applying for lots of different roles, tailoring every CV for the job description is hard work, but it's the best way to get through.
What about put something wacky in the About Me section, like
bringing a bit of personality out. Bringing a bit of personality out, absolutely.
I didn't do that, by the way.
You had pet ants.
I don't think that would make me a job.
The final question to link it back to our merry bid: what's more important, a qualification in maths or Latin?
It's got to be maths, isn't it?
Okay. Sorry, Mary.
Don't tell Mary. Thanks very much indeed.
No problem.
Great to have you on the programme. Now, look, we often talk about the way young men view things in today's world. The manosphere, for example, has been a phrase that we've talked about an awful lot. But what about young women? Well, there's a fascinating new poll that we're going to bring in the details of. This is by Merlin Strategy. It's for the New Statesman, and it's been examining the gender divide, because there is one, and we can take you through some of the top lines. So, young women significantly less likely to say they are proud to be British than boys. They're also 3 times more likely to hold a negative view of men compared to the other way around. This, I think, is really, really interesting. Men hold a much more favourable under 25 view of women than the other way around. Twice as likely not to want children compared to young men. So much to unpack here. The poll also believed they are much less likely to believe the economy works in their favour, and are also more pessimistic about their own future. I mean, we've talked a lot about, the manosphere, about young men going to the right, young women going to the left, and, sometimes, further left, the Green Party, etc., a real thing. We can get more on this now with Scarlett Maguire, the director of Merlin Strategy, behind this.
Really, thank you so much for joining us. Really, so interesting. I mean, the first question I have on this negative view of the opposite sex, how simple was the question?
The simple was, how positive a view do you have of the opposite gender? And so we just asked it to young men and we asked it to young women. The divide was really stark, so more than 7 in 10 young men said they had a favourable view of young women, just 7% said negative, which is still, probably too many, but 7% said negative. For young women, it was only 50% had a positive view, 21% negative, and for under 25s, it was 1 in 3 young women had a positive view. And just
although the 3 times more likely actually makes it sound worse, to be honest.
Well, it's 21% versus 7%, but it's still, I think that's still quite a stark difference if you're thinking of 1 in 5 young women having a negative view of men.
Particularly given the amount of time we spend talking about young men's view of women and how there is like a relatively small but significant group of men who, I guess, have a misogynistic view of women. Well, if you look at this, the view that women have towards men are also stark. Is there an issue, I'm so interested in a lot of this, that Polling, I think, over historically has shown that you basically just get more and more right-wing with age, and there's not much gender divide on it.
Yeah.
Is there more of a split going on now with the younger generation between women being more left-wing than young men?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is we are seeing a split, but it is being driven by young women going to the left rather than young men going to the right. So, interestingly, Reform are actually underperforming Boris Johnson with this age group of young men. So it's not as if, actually, over the last few years, we've seen, in terms of electoral behaviour anyway, lots of young men going over to what you might call the populist right. But we are seeing young women in great volumes, and, in fact, quite a lot of young men, too, going to the sort of populist left, if that's what you want to call it.
Are we increasingly divided, generally speaking, and are younger people more divided politically?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think when you look at this data, I certainly feel like young women feel that division really, really strongly. And I think, again, this is what's quite interesting, is young women feel they are more divided from men than men feel from women, and that's a host of metrics. It's not just on that overall positivity thing. But I think what I find very interesting is just looking at this generation in general. They really don't look like the rest of the population. You might say that's normal. They're under 30, they're younger, they haven't got the same concerns yet, they've got very different issues. But I do think we're looking, this sort of Gen Z and the things that come after it, have lived in quite a radically different world from us and will continue to reshape ours in the same way.
You see, this is the key point as well, right? Because you look at this, you're like, oh, my God, young women hate men. But I guess we are also looking at a younger generation of women who have grown up with porn, right? You know, and mobile phones and tech and all of the difficulties that come along with that as well. So I guess you might think, is it any surprise that they don't feel the economy is working for them, that they don't want to have kids, that they have they're frightened of men, perhaps?
Well, exactly, and I think especially that point on the economy, I think it's very obvious to, well, I think it's obvious to people that the economy isn't working for young people across the board. And so I don't think it's then surprising that you have, per se, a generation that are switching off from it. So, again, one of the findings was that young women have a much more favourable view of communism than they do of capitalism. And I think that shocked some people, but actually, if you're a young person coming out into the economy now, you might completely disagree with what they think about that. But, you know, if you're graduating, we found, again, that young female graduates feel all of these things a lot more strongly than non-graduates, and especially white women graduates. It's not working for them.
More women preferred communism to capitalism?
Young women.
Young women.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. And it was communism, not socialism. That
communism.
Blimey, that's striking. In terms of the being proud of your country aspect, is that through time been like that, do you think, or is it a new development?
I think it is relatively new. I mean, we've seen polls that have said similar things to that over the last couple of years, but I think that is quite new. And again, what's quite interesting there is an ethnicity divide. So young white women are more likely, in fact, they say overall that the country is racist. Young ethnic minority women are split on the question. So if you're a young white woman, you're more likely to think the country is racist. You're actually more likely to think it's sexist as well, which is obviously then, I think, if they think the country's racist and sexist, it's not that surprised that they're not proud of it, I guess.
That is so, honestly, these figures are so interesting. And I guess it partly explains the success of the Green Party more recently as well, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And even at the last election, before we had Zach Polanski give them a bit of a sort of a revamp and a reboot, you had astonishing amounts of young women, given their overall performance, voting for the Green Party even in 2024.
Really, really interesting stuff. Scarlett, thank you very much indeed. Scarlett there talking about that fascinating polling.
Let's have a look at the weather.
I hope we haven't forgotten anything.
Travel insurance, I tick that box.
Yeah, but remember what you forgot last year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, the next few days are going to bring some widespread showers and general rain. The weekend, though, I'm pleased to say, looks a bit more settled. Much of Wales and northern and central England will be dry this morning. There'll be some sunny spells. Central parts of Ireland should be largely fine as well. Elsewhere, there'll be a scattering of showers, some hail, the odd rumble of thunder possible too. By lunchtime, the southwest of Ireland will then cloud over with some more general rain moving in. It's going to be a bit cooler and fresher than yesterday, less windy. And then the afternoon is going to see some cloud and patchy light rain.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
It's a big day for parents across the country who will be finding out whether their child has got a place at their first choice primary school or not.
I mean, it's a massive milestone for kids, parents, a whole lot of us starting school. There's a lot of concern, though, that not enough of them are as ready as they should be. Some figures showing that some children start reception without being able to eat, drink by themselves or even use the toilet.
Here to talk about it all is Jenny Shaw, an early education expert at Busy Bees Nursery, a firm which runs hundreds of nurseries across the UK. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
a tense day for a lot of, well, kids too, but the parents as well.
Absolutely, but I think it is an exciting day. You know, it's a huge milestone in children and parents' lives. And, you know, we just really want to reassure families that, you know, there's a lot of time between now and September that if you're concerned that your child isn't ready for school, there's lots of practical things you can do now to support them.
I always have a bit of an issue with some of these headlines, if I'm honest, because everyone's like, it's appalling, children are not toilet trained when they go to school. But I think there is a huge difference between a 4-year-old with a September birthday who's nearly 5 going to school, and a 4-year-old who's only been 4 for 1 month, and they were 3 before that.
Absolutely.
And actually, you know, if they're going into a school, they're expected to use a new toilet on their own in a new building. They've got to use a knife and fork. They've got to take their tray out. They've got to peel that. I mean, it's actually a lot for someone who was only 3 a few weeks ago, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Did they start school too early?
I mean, I think that's you know, it's a really big question. But what I would say is that, you know, at Busy Bees, we do a lot around the unique child, and that's exactly what you're talking about there. That, you know, every child is different, and so we need to meet the child where they are and put the right support in place so that they do feel confident. And confidence is one of the biggest things for children, because we want them to be able to say, I don't know where the toilet is, or I've lost my book bag, without, you know, being really worried about saying that. So it's building up that confidence, and that resilience with children is really, really important.
As you said, you know, still time ahead of September.
Absolutely.
Particularly for those younger kids, what are your tips to parents in the months ahead?
So I think independence is a really big one. And at Busy Bees, everything we do is through our approach of playful teaching, and you can do that at home as well. So simple things you mentioned about eating properly, using a knife and fork. So as well as obviously practising that at meal times, we do things like, we'll do it with Play-Doh as a play-based activity, that families can do that at home as well. Pouring drinks, we add jugs to our water trays. You could do that at bath time. So I think those practical things, just really, there's no pressure, it's just about that play-based approach to learning is really, really important.
The key thing, other than parents, which obviously have a huge role as well, the biggest role, is early years and nurseries, right? You know,
Absolutely.
if you go to an amazing nursery, you will be school ready. If you don't, you may very well not be, depending on your age, right? Do you think the government is prioritising nurseries in the early years sector?
I think that's a really big question. I think, you know, you're absolutely right. Early years experiences are fundamental for children. All of that, everything that we do at Busy Bees, everything that happens in the children's early years is so, so important for their, you know, for their start when they go into formal education.
It's a sector that was hit by the rise in national insurance contributions as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, you know, not my area of expertise as the education lead at Busy Bees, but I think, you know, what I would say is that, you know, for families, you know, looking to access early years education, you're right, it's really important that they choose the right centre for their child, so that they can make sure they get a best start as possible.
In terms of the other kind of decisions parents have to make over the coming months, what are the key bits of advice for them?
So, you know, talking to your child is just really important. You know, getting them to understand, you know, what's going to be different about school, and just having those gentle conversations, thinking about building your child's emotional resilience. So vocabulary is really important. So if a child's feeling frustrated or exasperated, but they haven't got the word for it, that can be really frustrating for them. So I think it's making sure that we, you know, do as much as we can to support them in feeling that confidence.
Fascinating stuff. Great to have you on the programme. Big day, of course, for so many families, as you say, and, of course, an awful lot for kids and parents to get ready for as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. A couple of stories just to update you on before we leave you for the morning. So, new data suggests around 1 in 5 teenagers say that they've stopped sharing their political views for fear of being ostracised or cancelled. It's according to the Economist Educational Foundation, that says almost half of 15 to 17-year-olds say they wouldn't feel ready to vote in the next general election. Leading off, I guess, on some of the stuff we were covering earlier.
Really interesting, that one. I mean, we discussed this a little bit on the podcast this morning. I thought 1 in 5, 22%, it's not that high. I mean, no one should feel pressured not to say what their political views are for fear of being cancelled, so it's too high. But it's also an interesting difference compared to the US, I've always thought, on this, where people really wear their politics on their sleeve. And outside of Brexit, which changed that a bit here, I think it's quite nice that people don't wear their politics on the sleeve too much. So that's a different point to saying you should feel free to air your political views if you want to. But it's weirdly a kind of... I quite like the British way of keeping your politics to yourself.
It's interesting the change with the contrast with America as well.
Yeah.
Although I wonder if, you know, maybe the left-leaning young women might feel a bit different depending on what your politics are, for example.
Exactly, that poll's very interesting.
We've also had some new data showing that the government freed 179 prisoners in error in England and Wales in the space of a year. A report revealing an average of 3 prisoners a week were freed by mistake between April 2025 and March of this year.
The Justice Secretary, David Lammy, called the figures unacceptable. He promised to bring the prison system into the 21st century.
We asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this carefully. She has provided a 200-page report, 33 recommendations. I'm accepting all of those recommendations. And the thrust is that we have to move to a digital system. We will move to a biometric system so we can follow every prisoner from police contact through the criminal justice system. And of course that we will invest in moving from this paper-based system where errors are being made, often by junior staff, to a digitally based system over the next few years.
That's all from us for today. Coming up, of course, we are going to be continuing our coverage of the economic hit of the war in the Middle East and the government's contingency plans around food shortages.